when my daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Either you pay my debts or you walk away from my life." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her to reconsider. I smiled, went to my bedroom, and pulled my old suitcase down from the closet shelf. She thought that smile meant I'd given, just like I always had. She didn't know that was a moment I stopped being her safety net. A week later, I woke up to 24 missed calls on my phone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I go any further, do me one small favor. If you're listening from somewhere quiet or busy, late at night or early morning, tap subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from. It helps these stories find the people who need them. Now, let me tell you how it really began. I'm 67 years old. I've lived long enough to know the difference between love and obligation, and long enough to understand how easily the two get confused. The house I live in isn't fancy. It never was. But every corner of it carries a memory. My late wife picked the curtains. We refinished the floors together after Emily went off to college. This place wasn't just where I lived. It was where I gave most of my life. That afternoon, I came back from the grocery store with aching wrists and 2 heavy bags. I remember thinking about how quiet the house felt. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you listen to your own breathing. Emily was already there. She was sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her, envelopes, notices, the kind people don't open right away because they already know what's inside. "Dad," she said without looking up, "we need to talk." I set the bags down slowly. Something in her tone told me this wasn't a conversation. It was a presentation. She started explaining before I even sat down. Credit cards, personal loans, late fees, penalties, numbers that stacked on top of each other until they stopped sounding real. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she said quickly. "It just happened." I asked a simple question. "How much?" She hesitated. That pause told me more than any number could. When she finally said it, I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. Not panic, not anger, just a deep, familiar disappointment. I'd seen this kind of math before. The kind that only works if someone else pays. I folded my hands and told her the truth. "I can help you make a plan. I can't erase this for you." That's when her expression changed. The warmth disappeared. The daughter I raised stepped aside, and something colder took her place. Something tired, entitled, and certain. "So you're saying no," she said flatly. "I'm saying I won't destroy what I've left to cover mistakes I didn't make." I replied. She pushed her chair back and stood. "You have savings," she said. "You don't need all of it." "I do." I looked at her then. Really looked. At the woman who once needed my hand to cross the street. The same woman now calculating my worth down to a dollar amount. "If you don't do this," she continued, "then I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I can't be part of your life knowing you chose money over me." There it was, the ultimatum. Either I paid her debts, or I walked away. The room felt very still, like the house itself was listening. I nodded once. "All right," I said quietly. Relief flickered across her face. Just for a second, she thought she'd won. Then I turned toward the hallway. "Dad," she said confused. "I'll pack." The silence that followed was heavy. The kind that tells you something irreversible has just happened. I took the suitcase down from the shelf. The same one my wife and I once used when the road ahead felt endless and full of promise. I packed only what I needed. Clothes, medication, a framed photo, my small leather journal, where I'd written every expense for decades. When I rolled the suitcase back down the hall, Emily was still standing there, unmoving. She didn't stop me. She didn't apologize. She didn't think I'd actually leave. I walked out my own house without slamming the door, and that was the last quiet moment we'd have for a long time. I didn't go far. That night, I checked into a small roadside motel just outside town. The kind of place people stay when they don't want to be noticed. One bed, one chair, a narrow desk pressed against the wall. Clean, quiet, and temporary. I placed my suitcase on a rack and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the hum of the heater click on and off. The silence felt different here. Not peaceful. Empty, like a pause between two sentences. I pulled my phone from my pocket. No messages. No calls. I expected that. Emily had always needed time to adjust when things didn't go her way. I assumed she'd cool off, call me in the morning, and we'd talk like adults. I was wrong. The next morning, I walked to a diner a few blocks away. Coffee tasted stronger there. The waitress didn't rush me. She didn't ask questions either. That suited me just fine. Back in the room, I opened my laptop. For 35 years, I worked in finance. Not the flashy kind. The kind that taught you how systems really work. Where money moves, how it stops moving, and how quickly things fall apart when someone who's been quietly holding everything together steps back. I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting. I was simply done pretending. I logged into my accounts. The familiar numbers appeared on the screen, balances that represented decades of discipline, of choosing the long road, of never spending what I hadn't earned. I reviewed the automatic transfers first, monthly payments I'd set up temporarily, emergency help that became routine, quiet support that no one thanked me for anymore. I canceled them one by one. No drama, no speeches, just confirmations and reference numbers. Then I closed the laptop and waited. The first missed call came that afternoon. I watched the screen light up and go dark again. I didn't answer. By evening, there were 5. By the next morning, 11. Voicemails followed. At first, Emily sounded confused. "Dad, I think something's wrong with the bank. My payment didn't go through." Then irritated. "Can you call me back? This is serious." Then sharp. "You didn't even tell me you were going to do this." By the third day, the tone changed completely. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "The credit card company says they're freezing my account. They're talking about collections." That was when I realized she still didn't understand. She thought I was punishing her, that I'd cool off, that this was a phase. She thought I'd come back once she felt enough fear. On the 4th day, I started getting calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail. "Mr. Holloway, this is Ridgeway Financial Services calling regarding an outstanding balance associated with your address." I listened to the message twice. She'd used my address. I sighed, not in anger, but in recognition. I'd seen this pattern hundreds of times in my career. When people run out of options, they start positioning blame. I called the number back. The conversation was polite, professional. "I need to clarify something," I said calmly. "That individual no longer lives with me and has no legal or financial connection to my accounts." The representative thanked me, made a note, asked for nothing else. That call took 3 minutes. The next 2 took less. By the end of the week, I'd corrected every record that needed correcting. And still, the calls kept coming. Emily stopped leaving messages after the 15th missed call. After that, it was just silence and ringing. I counted them out of habit. 24. The number blinked on my screen like a quiet accusation. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel either. I felt light. For the first time in years, there was no invisible weight pulling at my finances. No quiet obligation humming in the background. No fear of what might happen if I said no. I slept better than I had in months. On Saturday morning, I stepped outside the motel and saw a familiar car pull into the parking lot. Emily sat inside for a long moment before getting out. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just stripped of certainty. Her shoulders were tense. Her face tight with frustration and fear. She walked toward my door and knocked. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to make sure she understood something before I opened it. This wasn't her house. This wasn't her ground. And this wasn't a conversation she controlled anymore. When I finally opened the door, she didn't waste time. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I stopped paying," I said evenly. "You can't just do that," she snapped. "Everything's falling apart." I looked at her for a long moment before replying. "No," I said quietly. "Everything you were avoiding is finally catching up." Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't expected that. "You're doing this to teach me a lesson," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm doing this because you gave me a choice." She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. And for the first time, she realized I wasn't backing down. By Monday morning, Emily stopped knocking. She started calling again. Not the frantic kind this time. not the pleading. These calls were sharper, shorter, like she was trying to regain footing on ground that kept sliding out from under her. People are calling me Dad. Strangers. They're saying things you didn't tell me. I listened to the voicemails without responding, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something I should have seen years ago. She wasn't asking for help anymore. She was trying to regain control. That afternoon, I got another call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered this one. Mr. Holloway. A man said, his voice practiced and calm. I'm calling regarding an outstanding balance connected to your address. We've been informed there's been a change. There has, I said. That person no longer resides with me, and I'm not financially responsible for her obligations. There was a pause. Keyboard clicks. Understood. Thank you for clarifying. That was it. No threats. No drama. Just facts correcting a lie that should have never existed in the first place. By evening, I realized something else had shifted. The town was listening. Small towns always do. They don't need announcements. They notice patterns. Cars parked too long. Voices raised too often. People showing up where they shouldn't. At the diner the next morning, the waitress refilled my coffee without asking. She lingered a second longer than usual. "You all right, Walter?" she asked gently. "I'm fine," I said. She nodded. "Good." That was all, but it told me enough. Emily had started talking. I heard about it later that day from an old neighbor who recognized my number and decided to call instead of guessing. "She's saying you just cut her off," the woman said carefully. "Said you promised to always take care of her, then changed overnight." I thanked her and hung up. That version of the story didn't surprise me. People rarely tell lies outright. They just leave out the parts that make them uncomfortable. What Emily didn't say was that she'd given me an ultimatum. She didn't mention the choice. By Wednesday, the calls from creditors stopped coming to me. They went where they belonged. Emily, however, showed up again. This time, she didn't knock. She stood outside my door and waited. I watched her through the peephole for a long moment before opening it. She looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of tired that comes from holding up a story that's collapsing from the inside. "You've been telling people I abandoned you," she said the moment I opened the door. "I've been telling people the truth when they ask." I replied. She stepped forward. "This is humiliating. You made it public." I said calmly, "Not me." Her jaw tightened. "You could have handled this privately." "I tried," I said. "You turned it into an ultimatum." She looked away. For the first time since all this began, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Not regret, yet, but awareness. "They're threatening legal action," she said quietly. "Wage garnishment. Account freezes." I nodded. That's usually what happens when debts aren't paid. She stared at me. "How can you be so calm?" "Because I've already lived through the worst part," I thought. Instead, I said, "Because I'm no longer responsible for fixing choices that aren't mine." Her voice rose. "You're my father." And I acted like one. I replied, "For years." Silence stretched between us. "You're letting people think I'm irresponsible," she said finally. "I'm letting people see the truth." I corrected. "There's a difference." She scoffed. "So that's it? You're just going to sit back and watch this ruin me?" I looked at her, really looked, at the fear underneath the anger, at the cracks forming in the version of herself she'd been protecting. "No," I said. "I'm going to watch you face what you avoided." Her hands clenched into fists. "You enjoy this." That was the moment I realized she still didn't understand. This isn't about enjoyment. I said evenly, it's about boundaries. Something you decided I didn't deserve. She took a step back, as if the ground had shifted. "People are asking questions," she muttered, "about how I lived the way I did, about how I afforded things." I nodded once. "They're finally doing the math." Her voice dropped. "You could fix this with one transfer. And you could fix it by taking responsibility." I replied. She stared at me for a long time, then shook her head slowly. "You're not the man I thought you were," she said. I met her gaze. "Neither are you." That landed harder than she expected. She turned away without another word and walked across the parking lot, shoulders rigid, back straight, still pretending she had control. But control isn't something you announce. It's something you feel slipping away. That night, my phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. We need to talk. Really talk. I set the phone down without replying. Because now, the conversation wasn't about money. It was about accountability. And I wasn't going to have it on her terms. By the time Emily texted, we need to talk. Really talk. I already knew what she meant. She didn't want conversation. She wanted leverage. I let the message sit for most of the day, not as punishment, just to remind myself of something I'd forgotten for too long. I had no immediate access to anyone who had learned to use urgency as a weapon. We agreed to meet that evening at the diner down the road. Neutral ground. Public. No raised voices. No scene she could later reshape into something else. When I arrived, she was already there. She looked different. Not dramatic. Not broken. Just worn down in a way you can't fake. Her shoulders were tight. Her phone sat face down on the table, like a problem she didn't want to look at anymore. She didn't order food. Neither did I. I don't understand how it got this far, she said finally, breaking the silence. Everything just collapsed all at once. No, I replied calmly. It collapsed all at once because it was being held up by one thing. She frowned. What thing? Me. That landed quietly, but it landed. She exhaled sharply. That's not fair. I paid for your tuition when cheaper options existed. I said, I help with rent, with emergencies that stopped being emergencies. I covered shortfalls you promised would be temporary. And when I finally said I couldn't erase your debts, you gave me a choice. She looked away. I was under pressure. So was I said, for years. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. You could still help. Not everything. Just enough to stop the bleeding. I shook my head. That's the same request with different words. Her eyes flashed. You're really willing to let me lose everything? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked, do you know why I didn't argue when you gave me that ultimatum? She hesitated. Because you didn't care? No, I said quietly. Because I finally understood what our relationship had become. She stiffened. What does that mean? It means love had turned into expectation, and expectation had turned into entitlement. She pushed her chair back slightly. So now you're punishing me. I'm setting terms. I corrected. Something I should have done a long time ago. She crossed her arms. What kind of terms? I folded my hands on the table. Steady. Calm. No anger left to spend. If you want any relationship with me moving forward, I said, it won't involve money, not loans, not bailouts, not quiet rescues. Her mouth opened to interrupt, but I raised a hand, not sharply, just enough to stop the momentum. And I continued, there's one more condition. She went still. Of course there is. You need to be honest, I said, not just with me. With the people you've already involved. Her brow furrowed. What are you talking about? You've told people I abandoned you, I said, that I changed overnight, that I promised always take care of you. Her voice sharpened. That's how it felt. Feelings don't erase facts, I replied. You gave me an ultimatum. You tied our relationship to money. If you want anything left between us, that truth has to be acknowledged. She stared at me, disbelief creeping in. You want me to humiliate myself. I want you to take responsibility, I said. There's a difference. She laughed once, short and bitter. In front of who? The whole town. You don't need a stage, I said. Just the people you spoke to, the ones you involved. Correct the story. Her jaw tightened. And if I don't, then we stop here, I said simply. The words hung between us. You're asking me to choose between my pride and my father, she said quietly. I shook my head. I'm asking you to choose between accountability and avoidance. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking slightly now. You know what they're saying about me? She asked. That I lived beyond my means. That I depended on you. That I lied. Did you? I asked gently. She didn't answer. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said. I'm doing this because if you don't face this now, you'll repeat it with someone else later. She swallowed hard. What if I can't fix it? You don't need to fix everything, I said. You just need to stop pretending you didn't play a role. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And if I do what you're asking, then we take things slowly. I said, coffee, conversations, no money, no obligations, just honesty. She wiped at her eyes, frustrated more than emotional. You're different now. I am, I agreed, because I finally learned that protecting you from consequences was hurting us both. She sat back, staring at the empty space between us. How long do I have? She asked. Until Sunday, I said. After that, I moved forward without expecting anything. She nodded slowly, like someone memorizing a map they weren't sure they wanted to follow. When she stood to leave, she hesitated. Do you even want me in your life anymore? She asked. I met her eyes. I want a daughter, not a transaction. She didn't reply. She just walked out. I stayed where I was for a while after she left, listening to the low hum of the diner, the clink of cups, the quiet rhythm of people living their ordinary lives. I felt no triumph, just clarity, because for the first time, the next move wasn't mine. Sunday morning arrived quieter than I expected. No dramatic texts, no last-minute calls, no promises sent in panic, just silence. I dressed slowly, deliberately, the same way I used to before work when my days were predictable and my decisions didn't carry the weight of blood and history. I wasn't sure what I would find when I stepped outside, but I knew something inside me had already settled. I had said everything that needed to be said. The rest was up to her. I went to the diner anyway, not because I expected her to show up, but because it had become my place to think clearly, a place where nothing was owed and nothing was demanded. I took my usual seat, ordered coffee, black. The waitress gave me a knowing look. Small towns remember patterns. They remember who comes alone and who stops coming altogether. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I was halfway through my second cup when I saw her. Emily stood just inside the door, scanning the room like she wasn't sure she belonged there anymore. She looked smaller somehow. Not weak, just unguarded. Like someone who'd finally put down armor they'd been carrying too long. She walked over slowly. Hi, Dad, she said. I nodded. Morning. She sat down, folded her hands, then unfolded them. No phone this time. No urgency. I did what you asked, she said quietly. I waited. I told them the truth, she continued. The people I talked to, the ones I blamed you to. I told them about the debts, about the ultimatum, about how much you helped me before I ever asked for more. Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. I didn't excuse myself. I didn't soften it. I studied her face, not for guilt, but for ownership. And I asked. She swallowed. Some people were kind. Some weren't. A few said they already suspected it. That didn't surprise me. And how do you feel? I asked. She let out a shaky breath. Ashamed, relieved, scared, all at once. I nodded slowly. That's usually how growth feels at the start. She looked at me then. Really looked. I didn't realize how much of my life was built on you fixing things, she said. I thought that was love. And now, I asked. Now I see it was comfort, she admitted. And I mistook comfort for security. I said nothing. I'm not asking for money, she added quickly. Not now. Not ever. I know, I said. If you were, you wouldn't be here. Her eyes filled, not with tears this time, but something steadier. I'm getting help, she said. Financial counseling. Therapy. I've already started cutting expenses. Downsizing. It's humbling. Humbling can be healthy, I replied. She nodded. I don't expect forgiveness. Or trust. I just didn't want to disappear without choosing honesty. That mattered more than she knew. We sat there quietly for a moment, the world continuing around us like it always does, unaware of the small private earthquakes that change lives forever. Dad, she said softly, do you still plan to walk away? I considered the question carefully. I walked away from the arrangement. I said, not from you,